Lance, it is great to speak to you today, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation. Firstly, I just can't believe the sheer amount of work that you put in to compile the scouting reports for NFL.com. The detail you provide for so many players is very much appreciated and respected by those of us who obsess about the draft. Can you just take us a little bit behind the curtain here? And what is the scale of the amount of work you put in to be able to provide the reports for us on NFL.com? How much of a passion for you is scouting and NFL football, given your family ties to the game and the fact that you've been doing this
Right.
for such a long time now?
I still have the passion. I love doing it. I love getting into, when you actually get the tape on, and it can be a little arduous when you have to get through the sheer numbers. But then when you run into someone's tape that you really enjoy watching, it can make your day. And I know it seems weird unless you've done what I'm doing, and I know there's plenty of people who are going to listen to your podcast who have done it on some scale. You can only then appreciate when you find a guy that you think, man, this is a really good player. It's fun to find a player that sometimes is off the radar. It's like finding that favorite, you know this cool restaurant or a band or a TV show or something that's streaming that you want other people to see as well. That's maybe under the radar. That's always fun. In terms of the sheer volume, so I combine tape work with background study, with data study, and I want to get a complete picture of the player. I'll look at some of the data to see if there's something that alerts me to a strength or weakness I need to see. I try to study the athlete, anything I can off the beaten path in terms of what they did in high school, things like that. And then you turn the tape on and you find out the tape. And then usually you complete the process with their testing, which would be either to combine or at a pro day. And unfortunately, we're gonna be missing out on a lot of those pro days in terms of completing the athletic profile. So I write 500 players a year minimum. I will write more actually because after the draft, if someone's been drafted who I didn't write up, then I'm responsible for their draft profile post facto as well. So, a quarterback will typically take a pretty decent quarterback will typically take, I don't know, 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours in terms of film and writing the player. The writing the player takes a long time too. Taking your notes and putting them into a more concise format is can be a little time consuming. Joe Burrow took me about 6 hours because I just kept going back and forth on what I wanted to say and how to say it, because he's it's a very unique situation with Joe Burrow from a standpoint of a 1 year wonder, a guy who was nothing like he was last year but had this monster season this year, but may require specific situation to succeed. It required a little bit more. I would say on average, a lesser player, and I'm looking at lesser players now. They might take me 25 to 30 minutes to get through the necessary tape because I'll use like Pro Football Focus's Ultimate Tool, which gets me to the plays I need much, much more quickly. And so for a wide receiver, I can go see all your targets very quickly. I can see your contested catch opportunities very quickly. I can see your drops. I can see your touchdowns. So I can get a profile of a player much more quickly. I have 2 years of tape right now. So in some cases, I'll look at 18 and 19 tape. But your average player and write up is going to be, at this stage, it's going to be an hour and 15 to an hour and a half with just your average, combine level player. I'll usually spend, I would say, an hour and a half on a combine level player on average. The high end players take more time, obviously.
I think one of the notable things about your reports is the language that you use is very creative. I was reading earlier, you called Damian Lewis a forklift. You compared him to a forklift. Do those
Right.
things like come to your mind while you're actually watching the tape, or do you actually sit down afterwards and go, how can I make this a bit different than the next report I'm going to write?
Well, it's. I'm glad you asked that question because the first year I did this for NFL, I've got a lot of respect for the work that Nolan Naraki has done in the past with Pro Football Weekly and then with NFL.com. He only did it there for 1 year. And so I wanted to make sure that I had language that really painted a picture. And I had an former NFL general manager tell me just say what you see. Say what you see. When I was talking to him and consulting with him before I started writing it on this kind of scale, and so with that in mind, and I've got a little bit of a writing background, and I've done radio for over 20 years, and so it's not unusual for me. I've been a content creator for quite some time, and I also watch a variety of different sports across all platforms. And so, I'm always looking for cross references. I'm always thinking of creative ways to say things. But like with Damian Lewis, it just, that when you have a guy who can move someone around, like Quentin Nelson, I said was built like a bank vault. That's just what, or a bank safe. I thought of, golly, this guy has a very unique build. What does it remind me of? And so it came to me, and I thought this really will help, I think, paint a picture for people who have never seen him. Because what I'm trying to do is write a profile for someone who's never seen this player. And so if I can get creative with language and it can paint a picture in your mind of what that player's skill set is and what it can do, then that's what I like to do. Sometimes it comes to me. Sometimes I'll work a little bit at it, but I do think it's part of, it is something I'm aware of, that people have noticed that about me in the past. And so I try not to let them down. I try to come up with a couple creative ones every year.
My first question on the draft class in 2020 specifically is quite a broad one. It's quite a simple question, really, but I also think it's one that I think a lot of people like to hear the answer to, which is ultimately, how good overall do you find this draft class to be compared to some of the more recent ones?
I think it's a pretty good one. Rob, when we talk about how good a class is, you really have to define what that means, because for some, they might mean the very best players, like how many all pros could be in a class. For others, it's, hey, can my team get a starter in the third or fourth round? So it can vary in a very general sense. I think this is a pretty good draft because at the important positions, look, it's not a deep quarterback draft. If you're not getting one of the top four quarterbacks, you may not be getting a long-time NFL starter. That's just the way it is. So it's not a great quarterback draft. It's not a great interior offensive line draft, but it is a good tackle draft, and that's not something we've been able to say for a while. It's a good offensive tackle draft. That's nice. It's got some depth at cornerback. I think it's got some intriguing inside outside linebacker prospects in the first couple of rounds, which I think is nice, because that can, we had an amazing one a couple of years ago, and then it was down a little last year. I think it's pretty intriguing again this year. And then, you always want to look at skill position, and you've got a very special season at wide receiver, because you have so many players who could end up playing in the NFL into second contracts in this draft, that I think you're going to find even in the fourth and fifth round. So I think in general, based on the way football is played right now, pass protection, wide receivers, guarding wide receivers, which would obviously be the cornerbacks, you've got an interesting season. I don't think it's a loaded draft, but I think it's a decent draft. It's solid in certain high impact areas.
I think I'm right in saying that you have a particular interest in offensive linemen. Will the league see it as a bit of a relief this year that there are some good tackle prospects that are going to go early? That seems to be a need position across the league, really.
Yeah, it is. And, it's been a need position for quite some time. And there just hasn't been a lot of relief in the draft. There just haven't been deep drafts at tackle. It's been a major, major issue. And then this year, you're going to get four guys who I think are early plug and play starters at tackle, provided teams see Tristan Wirfs as a tackle and not a guard. Some see him as a guard, but regardless, I think he's a tackle. Andrew Thomas, Becton, Jedrick Wills. And then you get into, for the first time in a long time, there's some pretty good, some pretty talented, I should say, offensive tackles who should develop with time. Josh Jones from University of Houston, Austin Jackson, obviously from USC. Now, those are guys that typically I think they're going to be pushed up because there's going to be an early run on tackles. I wouldn't take those guys in the first, but I think they will end up going, if not in the first, in the top 40 to 45 picks. Isaiah Wilson is a player who's got a lot of talent and potential, just, has a lot of different things, kinks to work out. So for the first time in a long time, there's actually players in the second round, and there's actually players late second and even into the third round that could end up being factors along the offensive line. So that's, and there are some developmental guys as well. The one thing I do want to mention, though, Rob, is that a team told me this. The big problem that you have with having these developmental tackles, and even if they're developmental prospects and not projects, and I'm talking about, guys who can be second, third round picks, with what we're expecting to happen this year, which is basically, cancellations of off-season programs as we know them during the summer, it's really going to take a less polished tackle and a less polished anything, but especially offensive tackle, which they're typically behind because of the way college offenses are run. I think you're going to see a real problem with getting much out of those guys in year one because you're not going to have the same development phases in the offseason that you had previously. So I think the time frame to launch for some of those players like Austin Jackson may be a little bit more delayed than people were previously expecting.
What is a position, Lance, or a group of positions that might be able to adjust a bit quicker than maybe some of the the offensive line, for example, with a shortened off season maybe or preseason program?
Well, so because of the way that the NFL game has begun to, at least certain programs have begun to go to more four wide sets and more of a college look and a college feel, I think that there will be wide receivers who can make that adjustment much more quickly. It used to be we said that wide receivers took more time because they'd get into a pro style offense and it was harder to learn, but I think so many offenses have been simplified now, and that's what they're used to in the collegiate level anyway. So I think wide receiver really can make a move a little more quickly, and I think linebackers as well. Linebackers a lot of times they get to actually slow down in a way mentally when they go to the pros because you see so many college games with this jet sweep action pre-snap and then the zone read off, a fake on the jet sweep, a zone read fake with an RPO behind it. And it's like linebackers' heads are spinning. And in the NFL, you don't see that as much. So I think instinctive linebackers like Logan Wilson, for example, out of Wyoming, I think that guy comes in right away and has a feel for the NFL game. I think a lot of these linebackers will have a little bit more of a feel for the NFL game a little more quickly because they're used to seeing everything out of a gun. They're used to seeing the ball thrown around on the perimeters and the flanks, and they're used to the quick game passing wise. So I think it's going to be a little easier for them to make the adjustment than maybe it was in years past.
As soon as you brought him up, Logan Wilson, love that guy. Watched him a couple of weeks ago. Just sort of explain what you like about him and the range that he could go.
So I think that my guess on Logan, he's a top 100 player for sure. Very, very instinctive linebacker. A ton of pass production, ball production in the passing game. And when you have that at a linebacker, that's always that's always a light goes on when I see a guy who's got a lot of passes, defense, or interceptions, or pick sixes, because I saw it with Leighton Vander Esch as well. He's not Logan Wilson from Wyoming is not the same long limb type of athlete that Leighton Vander Esch was, but he's got very, very similar instincts in space. He does a great job of not only reading the quarterback's eyes, but anticipating, having a feel for where the route is around him and spot drops. He's got great ball production. If you make a mistake, if you're a guy that locks in on a wide receiver, he, especially a little slant towards the middle, he is going to jump up there and cause some problems for you. From a running game standpoint, he's very he's instinctive. He can make quick reads, but he's patient. He doesn't overflow ball. He doesn't overflow the action all that often, and he understands where his run fits are, what his job is, and he's strong enough to do that. He plays with a level of confidence and play strength that I really like. And I just see a guy who checks a lot of the boxes in terms of being a smart, consistent player who does his job on a regular basis. And that's what I want. And the question on him was, can he run sub 4.7? Because that's a magic number on inside backers. And he did that at the combine. His workout, he tested well. So that was kind of like the big check mark he needed to, I think, lock him in on day 3 and really potentially push him up to the earlier stages of earlier stages of I think round 3 and maybe even late day 2.
Now, from a Seahawks
I'm sorry, late round 2, not
round
day
two.
2.
From a Seahawks
Yeah.
perspective, they have some needs. I want to come back to that in a second, but as someone who is very familiar with Jadeveon Clowney from his time in Houston, what do you make of the current stalemate in free agency and the fact that he remains unsigned even now?
Well, I mean, I look, Jadeveon, I think has I don't think he put enough work into his craft in the first 4 years in terms of being a pass rusher. He's a tremendous athlete. He flashed as a sophomore at South Carolina, and then he had a disappointing season his junior year at South Carolina. With the Texans, he would always flash. He seemed to play his best football when J.J. Watt was out with an injury. He never had double-digit sacks. He had the pressures, and people that wanted to, make an argument for him would tell you about his hurries and pressuring the pocket. But I had a pass rush coach once tell me, the difference between pressures and sacks, don't let anyone tell you that it's random. He said guys who get sacks are more skilled. They've worked on their craft and they understand there comes a point in most rushes where you have an opportunity to flip the advantage in whether it's with hand usage, leverage, whatever the case may be, where you can flip the rep in your favor and you've got a better chance of, a lot of times those turn into quarterback hits or sacks. And he said, you can see the most skilled guys with how they do it when that opportunity arises. And with Clowney, he never really got there. Everything was the inside move. And I think he's even admitted privately to people I know that he realizes he's got to take that next step. And I know he worked on it last offseason. He was working on it this offseason before this issue arose. But I think Clowney is maybe overshooting his value in a market that is it's just not going to be favorable for him. Now, I do think he's got talent, but I think there are concerns about whether or not he's been able to make himself any better. Is he more skilled? And so it's a buyer's market. It's a team market, not going to be a player market in this particular instance. And I think Clowney is going to have to come down on his number, which we've heard he has done, and maybe come down a little bit more if he wants a shot to find that money. It may be a 1-year deal. Maybe maybe smarter for a prove it deal and then, move on to a new contract opportunity in 2021 because obviously this is an inopportune time to be a free agent.
Have you got much of a feel for the approach Seattle might take in this draft? Because obviously they've got some needs. Pass rush, because Clowney's not signed up in one in particular, but also further O-line help, some skill position help as well. They seem to be the 3 target areas at the minute.
Yeah, I think that you can find, like I said, I do believe that you can find, I don't know that I would, so teams ahead of Seattle, I do expect to probably reach on tackle. Seattle could look in the direction of a guy like Ezra Cleveland from Boise. That would be a little rich for my blood at the end of the first. But if they traded back and got into the second round, that's the kind of tackle that I think makes sense for what it is they do. And let's remember, if you do get a guy who's a developmental tackle, you also have a big advantage of letting that guy play behind Dwayne Brown, because Dwayne Brown was a developmental tackle himself coming out of Virginia Tech. He had the same type of great athlete, needs to learn to play, yada, yada, yada. And he became one of the really good left tackles in pro football since he came out. And so if you do decide to go tackle, as long as you're patient and understand they may not play a major role this year, I think long term it could end up being a decent draft pick. I think from a defensive end standpoint, if you look at pass rush and hoping that the right player falls to you in the mid-20s, that's going to be a little tough. I don't think Caleb Von Chason is getting there. I think Gross Matos will probably be off the board. I don't think AJ Epinesa is a player who really fits the explosive mold of a rusher off the edge for Seattle. So I don't see him as a first round option. So I think it's a little trickier finding an edge rusher there. There are edge guys who are high upside, low floor players who are going to go in the second round. But once again, I would be a little leery about drafting a guy like Terrell Lewis out of Alabama there at that spot just because it's a need. I would sit tight and take a player that makes sense in terms of what the board tells you, not what the need is.
I wanted to finish off just by asking about the running backs quickly. I thought it was a lot of fun to watch the top guys in this class. I mean, how early would you personally be projecting the likes of Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, players like that?
So I think there's a chance that Swift goes in the first, and I would have no problem with it. He doesn't have major wear and tear off the tires. Can be a 3-down player. I think he's maybe a little lesser version of Josh Jacobs, but not a lot lesser. I think he's in that same general neighborhood for me personally. And the argument from analytics people is, well, running backs are just, you can find them. They're a dime a dozen. Yeah, but getting club control for this length of time when they're really in their prime, I don't think is a bad move. Now, especially if you have multiple firsts. I think it turns into if you're Miami, for example, and you have an opportunity to draft a DeAndre Swift, I wouldn't necessarily shoot that idea down when you have multiple firsts, just like the Raiders had multiple firsts with Josh Jacobs, and he really played a factor last year. And when you're trying to turn around the culture of losing into a culture of winning, a good running back really can help not just control the football, but also with young quarterbacks. So I think that's something worth noting. I like Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor has seen so many loaded fronts because of what Wisconsin does. Everyone knows they're running. So when he gets to the NFL, I think it will be a load off his back to see standard 7 and 6 man boxes, much more so than the way that teams would load the box up on him at times against Wisconsin. I think he is a early second round pick. J.K. Dobbins in that same neighborhood. I expect one running back to go on the first at most, but then I do think every one of the running backs you talked about, Taylor, Edwards-Helaire, and also J.K. Dobbins, I do think they will go in the second round before the 50th pick. So that's going to be a sweet spot for running backs. And there's some quality running backs in this draft as well.
Lance, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you. And once again, a major thanks for the scouting reports. It's always an exciting time of the year when those reports are posted on NFL.com. So thanks for all the work you do in enhancing our draft experience every year.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind words. Thanks, Rob.